Hi, welcome to our webinar. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Rebecca Morgan, Director of Collector Services. We are lucky enough today to also be joined by Nikki Harris, Collector Services Manager, and Chris Barker, Information and Research Manager at the Royal Mint Museum. We're going to give you a brief introduction to the Royal Mint's Collector Services Division, followed by Nikki, who will give you an insight into the knowledgeable and passionate staff we have here at the Royal Mint. And finally, a brief history on the Royal Mint and the birth of the Sovereign. If you have any questions, please use the chat facility and we will get back to you at the end of the webinar. So Collector Services is a relatively new division at the Royal Mint, which itself is over 1100 years old, and we've been minting coins for all that time. Collector Services was born from a question we asked ourselves 4 years ago. How can we add value for collectors? What can we do to help them to enhance and enrich their collections? As a result, we developed some key services. Authentication and valuation services using original archives and modern technology to authenticate coins and provide you with a valuation. Coin care and display, giving you the access to the tools you need to enjoy your hobby and the best quality handmade cabinets to display your coins. And British and international historic coins as a service. As the original maker, we don't just know British historic coins, we struck them. And that means we are uniquely placed to offer the best service and advice to our collectors. One of our most exciting services is the Coin Finder service, where we go out and find the coins you need to complete your collection. We've been lucky enough to source some of the rarest coins in the world, and in just January this year we managed to source the Edward VIII Sovereign from one of our clients, securing the record for the most expensive British coin ever sold. History has so many fascinating stories, and coins are the perfect way to depict them. Collecting with the Royal Mint means you don't just discover history, you can own it.
Hi, my name is Nikki Harris. I have 10 years experience working within numismatics, and during that time I've had various roles such as account manager, product manager, sales leader and manager of the collector services department as I am today. So how did I get into the world of historic coins, which eventually would lead me to come and work for the Royal Mint? Well, it all stems from a real passion and love I have for history, and that was developed during my time at secondary school. I had a fantastic teacher by the name of Mr. Powell, who was a real character. He didn't really teach from textbooks too often, but what he did do was bring history to life for me with his fantastic storytelling. And that really resonated with me and left me with a passion for history that has been with me ever since. From then on, I was determined to work in a job where not only could I speak about history, but also be able to learn more about it every day. Now, once you are in the coin industry, then there's no better place to work than for the Royal Mint, and being the original maker, I was very proud to come and join the company in January 2018 in the newly created Collector Services Department. But I've been aware of the Royal Mint for much longer than that, of course. Being a local boy from the Rhondda Valleys, everyone where I'm from seems to know someone who works for the Mint. And I also vividly remember as a child being in the car with my grandfather and passing the Mint on our way to Llantrisant, and him telling me that's where the money's made. As a youngster looking at this big building with high fences and barbed wire on top, I thought, wow, I'd like to have a look in there one day. And thankfully, all these years later, I get to call it my place of work and come here on a daily basis. So what do we offer through the Collector Services Department? Well, we offer a dedicated account manager service. So you get your own personal account manager, you'll get their direct telephone number and direct email address, and they will be your personal point of contact for all matters at the Royal Mint. Your account manager will spend some time with you to discover what coins you're interested in, identifying any gaps in your collection, and can give you advice on how to build a collection you can be proud of. All types of customers use our account management service, from beginners to experts, from your classic investor type to customers who are looking to pass down a family heirloom to the younger generation. And we have a very friendly and experienced team of account managers here that can help all these different types of collectors. What the account managers look to provide their VIP customers is to take them on a journey to add real purpose to their collection. One of the most interesting pathways can be to collect a first year date sovereign from all the monarchs that struck the modern machine-struck sovereign. So starting with George III in 1817, then George IV in 1821 with the Lorette head portrait, then 1825 for the controversial bear head portrait, then William IV in 1830, the first of Queen Victoria's three portraits in 1838 by the famous William Wyon, 1887 the Jubilee head, 1893 the final portrait of Queen Victoria's reign, the veiled head, 1902 then for Edward VII, 1911 for George V, then the special proof sovereign from 1937 for George VI, and right up to Queen Elizabeth II, and the first readily, generally released sovereign in her reign, the 1957 sovereign. And that's one that's very popular with our customers, and one that you can actually purchase from our website right now in uncirculated condition. Another pathway that we can look to achieve for our customers is centered around the famous gold guinea. There were 8 monarchs who struck this famous coin, from the very first in 1663 under the reign of Charles II to George III's reign and the famous 1813 military guinea, which was struck specifically for the Duke of Wellington's army during the Napoleonic Wars. Now we can look to provide you with guineas from each of those 8 monarchs' reign and build a collection that is unique to you. We also offer a coin finder service, so there may be a coin that you've always wanted, or maybe there's a gap in your collection that you've never been able to fill. And through the account management service, we can source that perfect coin for your collection, and that could be for coins as simple as a shilling all the way to a precious Spur Royale. Coin grading is key for us. All our coin grades are fair and accurate reflections of the coin's quality, and very importantly, they come with a Royal Mint certificate of authenticity. And that provenance can be essential in the future when you look to sell or pass the collection down. To have that certificate from the Royal Mint, the authority on British coins, can give our customers great peace of mind. As a final bonus, with the account management service, you get the free delivery on all coins, the option of interest-free credit accounts. You get invitations to special VIP events where you get to meet your account manager in person, see some of the rarest coins in British history and actually hold history in your hand. And you get to hear special presentations from some of our friends at the Royal Mint Museum, such as Chris Barker and Dr. Kevin Clancy. And these events are held at special occasions such as the Tower of London and Westminster Abbey. So if you would like to find out more about the Collector Services Account Management Service, please reply in the Q&A section or email us on collectorservices@royalmint.com, or you can call us on 0800 032 2153. And finally, I'd like to show you 2 historic coins that we have available at the moment, and one of which is my favourite coin ever. So here we have it. This is my personal favourite coin, the 1989 Proof Sovereign. Now the obverse and reverse of this coin was designed by Bernard Sindall, with his obverse based on his 1977 medal struck for the Silver Jubilee of Queen Elizabeth II. The 1989 was a 1-year issue to commemorate the 500th anniversary of the first ever hammered gold sovereign of 1489 under the reign of Henry VII. It features Queen Elizabeth II seated on King Edward's coronation throne and the stunning double Tudor rose on the coin's reverse, both in homage to that original coin from 1489. It's a coin of many firsts, including being the first commemorative sovereign in history. It's the first sovereign reverse change in Queen Elizabeth's entire reign. It's the first time in over 100 years that a design other than St. George slaying the dragon has featured on a sovereign reverse. And it's the first time that the word sovereign has ever featured on a British coin. The £5 proof contains just under 40 grams of 22 karat gold and was originally only available as part of the 4-coin set. The one we have available has been independently graded by the Professional Coin Grading Service as PF69, which means it's virtually fully struck with minuscule imperfections. Now, it's not just British coins that we offer coins from all over the world and from different periods of time, some of which even predate the Royal Mint, such as Greek, Roman and Byzantine Empire coins. But one of our most popular ranges is the historic coinage of the United States. And one that we have available at the moment is the Columbus $half-dollar, silver $half-dollar. So a very different coin to the 1989 sovereign, but another coin of firsts. It's the first ever circulating commemorative coin in US history and the first to depict an historical figure, with Christopher Columbus getting that honour. It was struck to celebrate the 400th anniversary of Columbus's first voyage to America and was designed by chief engraver at the US Mint, Charles E. Barber. It shows the portrait of Columbus on the obverse and the depiction of the famous ship, the Santa Maria, on the coin's reverse, with the date 1492. It was intended to raise money for the 1893 World Exposition in Chicago, with approximately 400,000 being sold for a premium price. In fact, Remington typewriters paid $10,000 for the first ever specimen Columbian half dollar, which works out today at around about $285,000. The coin weighs in at 12.5 grams and contains 90% pure silver. Now, both these coins are available on our website at the moment. We have a nice supply of the Columbian half dollars, but stock of our 1989 sovereign range is extremely limited. So head off to the website as soon as possible to make sure you don't miss out. Thank you very much.
Good morning everyone, and welcome to this talk on the history of the Royal Mint, as well as an introduction to the history of the sovereign. My name is Chris Barker and I'm the Information and Research Manager at the Royal Mint Museum. Today I'll be giving you an overview of our history, and to begin we have to start with our foundation. Some of you may have heard the idea that the Royal Mint is 1100 years old. We get this information from the coinage evidence itself, and we have to use the coins of Alfred the Great. And what we can see here is an Alfred the Great penny. So on the obverse you have this depiction of Alfred and this inscription Alfred running around the top. But more interestingly is what you see on the reverse, where you have this Londonia monogram. So you can see an L, an O, an N, D on the end, a little I tucked inside the D, and there's a little connection between the downstrokes of the L and the N, which gives you the A. This spells out Londonia and demonstrates that this coin was struck in London. And it's from the first coins that are struck, the mints established by Alfred the Great in London, in approximately sort of 886, that we get our founding date. Now in modern terms, 886 has become a wee bit shaky, but what we can say with some degree of certainty is that from the late 9th century onwards, you've got a continuous history of an organisation that we today know as the Royal Mint. For centuries, all you're dealing with in circulation is one denomination, and that is a penny. It's quite a high value coin at this point in history, in the late Anglo-Saxon and early medieval period. It does, however, present some issues if you require change. And what they would do in this period is quite literally cut the coins into halves and to quarters. And that is what we can see on screen here, a halfpenny, or literally half a penny, and a quarter, a farthing, on the other side. In fact, the word farthing is probably derived from fourthing, farthing, so you can see how some of these terms have evolved over time. If you were to go on a tour of the medieval Royal Mint, what would you see? Well, you'd see something akin to this woodcut from the 15th century. Now, if we run through the processes, it is in essence quite similar to what we do today, although the actual detail of how we do it has changed dramatically. What we can see in the far top corner is a gentleman with a set of scales, and he is weighing in the raw bullion as it comes into the Royal Mint, the raw gold and silver. He'll then pass down the steps to the melter, that's the chap in front of the fire. He will then melt that gold and silver down and cast it into long, thin strips in sand moulds. The next part of the process can be seen with the chap with the giant shears, scissors, and he is then cutting that long strip of metal into your individual circular blanks ready for coining. That is the final part of the process that we can see here, where the gentleman is straddling the wooden block, and in his hand he's holding the magic bit of kit really ready to strike the coin, which is the dies, the tooling itself. Where is this process taking place? Well, from 1279 onwards, we know it takes place in the Tower of London. I don't want people to get carried away thinking that when they would go to the Tower, the Mint in the Tower, they would see some kind of grand, ornate set of buildings. Far from it. In fact, what you're dealing with is a series of wooden sheds, many of them open to the weather, often in poor states of repair. And that is because during the medieval period, and for quite some time, minting only occurred as and when bullion or political will was available to strike coins. As a result of that, you've got long periods of dead time where the mint falls into disrepair. And we know that when they start coming back in to strike coins again, you've got accounts of them coming back in to get bolts of timber to shore up these wooden buildings so that they can actually do their job properly. Imagine walking through the Mint in the Tower. Where you would be walking is through Mint Street. and that is the space between the inner and outer walls of the tower, which we can see on the plan from 1701. I'd like you to sort of put yourself in that position. Imagine everything that's been going on in that woodcut from previously. You've got smoke being kicked up by melting. You've got the noises of hammers repeatedly hitting metal. And you've got the bustle and hustle of people moving around this site in probably only about a narrow metres worth of walkway. This would have been a very noisy, dirty, smelly and hectic environment to be in when production is taking place. Despite that, you can still produce some remarkably beautiful coins. And that is what we can see on screen here, an example of. What we're dealing with here is the first regular gold coinage in England, and that is a gold noble. And this comes in the reign of Edward III in the 1340s. And what we're looking at here is a coin that's extremely valuable at this point in history. It's worth 6 shillings and 8 pence. Now this might sound like a daft denomination to modern ears, but it does work because it's a third of a pound. So 3 of these would give you £1. And it's designed to impress. It's designed to get across this idea of wealth and status. And that is why so much time and effort has gone into making this coin very elaborate and very ornate. This idea of using coins to get across messages might seem a little bit alien to a modern audience, but it is something that has been used for centuries. And if we skip forward a couple of centuries to this particular piece, we've got a very good example of that. What you're looking at on screen here is an example of a coin which should hopefully, its name anyway, ring true to many of you in the audience. Because what you're looking at on screen here is an example of the first sovereign. And the sovereign is a coin with an extremely long history. It goes all the way back to 1489 when it struck on the orders of Henry VII. You think, well, why 1489? Why does the sovereign come in that particular year? If you put yourself in Henry's shoes in 1489, it becomes a little bit more understandable. Henry VII was only relatively recently seized the throne from Richard at the Battle of Bosworth a few years earlier, and he's still quite shaky on that throne. There are many people nationally and internationally questioning his legitimate right to rule. So he needs to prop up his power base, and one of the means of doing that is the coinage. And he issues this spectacular large gold coin, the largest gold coin ever struck in England up to this point. And on it we can see Henry seated on this grand, elaborate throne with all the paraphernalia of royalty there. He's wearing the coronation robes, he's holding a sceptre, he's holding the coronation orb, and he's crowned. It's a very regal, strong image. And it's designed to convey to people that see this that he is the rightful ruler, the rightful monarch, in fact the rightful sovereign of England. And the name of this coin is no coincidence. It's that final blunt instrument to hammer home this message that he is the rightful ruler of the country. And we know Henry uses these things quite cleverly. So this isn't struck en masse for circulation. These are struck in limited numbers, and he's dishing them out to visiting dignitaries to his court. So imagine an ambassador is coming across from the court in Europe, and he's about to go back. What does Henry give him? A present of a sovereign. And that message about him being the rightful ruler can therefore be disseminated much more widely around Europe. That is one of the joys about coins, is whilst they're quite small, you can limit to what you can put on them, it does make them quite portable. And even though they are small, you can get quite a lot of information into them. Henry VII is also an interesting character because during his reign, more generally, the way the monarch is portrayed on coins changes. On the far side, on the right-hand side of the screen, we can see what we have here is a typical medieval coinage portrait. And that is a chap with curly hair and a crown. It's designed to convey a sense of royalty more generally, rather than a realistic portrait of the monarch. If we look on the other side, however, we can see a testoon of Henry VII. And on there, you have this more realistic portrait of the monarch. The designer has actually gone to some effort to convey a likeness to the man himself. Now, we today don't hold in our heads a popular image, really, of Henry VII, but we certainly do of his son, Henry VIII. And if we look at this coin here, there is absolutely no mistaking the man on screen is definitely Henry VIII. is that iconic image that we're so used to from that Hans Holbein portrait. He's quite a large gentleman, quite chubby, quite mean looking really in many ways. But Henry VIII is the villain of our coinage story. And that is hardly surprising really, because it's during his reign he debases the coinage extensively. And that is a little bit like watering down the beer. So imagine you've got this nice high purity silver coinage, which relies on its weight in silver to get its value. Henry, by the end of his reign, is broke. He needs to generate more income. And one of the ways he can do that is by making his supply of bullion go further. So he puts less and less silver into his coins and more copper. This intrinsically makes them worth less. The great con Henry's trying to pull is giving these coins to the public at the same value as they used to be when they were at the high purity silver. The public do not like these debased coins. They look awful, they're very rough, they're very red in appearance because of that copper coming through. So the mint, rather cheekily in many ways, plate them in a fine layer of silver to make them nice and shiny and more acceptable. One of the problems with doing that is that plate wears off. These are very much coins in active circulation, being passed from hand to hand, going from purse to purse. And you get wear first on any coin at the point of highest relief. Now, on a forward-facing portrait like this, that happens to be the nose area. So what happens is the silver wears off, and lo and behold, the red colour of the copper comes through from underneath. And as a result of that, poor old Henry picks up the nickname of Old Copper Nose. That serves him right for messing with the coinage. Skipping forwards a bit to how coins are made, we have to look at an advancement during the reign of Charles II in the 1660s. So for centuries, all you're dealing with are people hammering out coins by hand. And then in the 1660s, you get the introduction of a screw press, similar to what we can see on screen here. Don't get carried away when I talk about mechanisation. It still requires heavily on manpower, and you can see that you have two chaps pulling one way on the counterweight to the other. That creates a screw motion, the screw descends, and the coins are struck down at the base, near where the young gentleman is. This is hot, hard and heavy work for the four chaps doing pulling, and we reckon that they probably operate in shifts of around about 20 odd minutes or so. Despite that, reserve your sympathy for the young lad who is at eye level with the dies, because it's his job to put the blank on, then to flick the finished coin off, all in between bang, bang, bang. And given that you're using several tons of force, this is not a job that I particularly would want to do and put my fingers at risk. This has numerous advantages for the coinage though, this mechanisation process. What we see on screen here is a series of gold nobles, very thin, very rough, very ragged edges. You start to use a screw press and you can impart a lot more pressure than if you're hammering something out by hand. This means that you get a much more uniform, much more regular appearing coinage, and you get a much thicker coinage. And this quite literally gives you an edge, because then you can start to do something with the edges of the coins because they're much thicker. As we can see on this rather spectacular 5 guinea piece of Charles II, you get edge inscription appearing, but you also start to get milling on the lower denomination coins as well. You look at your 5p's and 10p's, they're milled. We don't bat an eyelid at it today, but it was a relatively new feature for the coinage in the 17th century. This has vital security implications because it stops people clipping the coinage. So imagine those gold nobles you saw earlier, they're very rough, ragged edges. What people used to do is they used to clip around the edges of those coins to get the precious metal content out. Because they were all very rough and ragged anyway, it's very difficult for the public to understand whether this is how it came out of the mint or whether this was because of adulteration. Put edge lettering, put milling on, it becomes instantly obvious if somebody's shaved content off the edge of a coin. Yet again, thinking about mechanisation and thinking about how the development of coins progresses, you're using a screw press for about 2 centuries or so. And it's not until the Industrial Revolution that you start to see the advent of steam power coming into the production of coins. And that is what we can see on screen here, is a steam-powered press. Now this new technology isn't pioneered by the Royal Mint. It is pioneered by that great entrepreneur Matthew Boulton, who established his own mint up in Birmingham in the 1780s using this new steam-powered technology. So the mint desperately needs to catch up because you have technological light and dark in comparison. Boulton using new steam-powered presses, And contrast that with what the Royal Mint is doing down in London, where you still have 4 blokes pulling on ropes to strike coins. The Mint cannot mechanise in the cramped confines of the Tower of London, so we have to move. And we move just across the road to a purpose-built site on Tower Hill. And what we can see on screen here is the rather grand office facade of the new Tower Hill Mint, which we move into in 1810. It takes us a couple of years to complete the move, so about 1810 to 1812 for moving from the tower. As I say, this is the office area, and behind the office building is where all the factory buildings are. You can see the chimney of the Royal Mint Refinery peeking out in the background there. And it's during this period that you get the introduction of the sovereign in its modern form. It's the sovereign as we understand it and still have it to this day. And that comes in the summer of 1817. What we can see with these new sovereigns is the portrait of George III, and also on the reverse the classic depiction of St George and the dragon, still used on the sovereign to this very day, although we have lost the garter belt that ran around the edge of the original 1817 sovereigns. It is this coin that really goes on to become the coin of the 19th century. You know, it's used around the globe as British interests and British commerce expands. And as a result of that, you need tens upon tens upon tens of millions of these things to grease the wheels of British colonial commerce. Therefore, it makes much more sense to start establishing branches of the Royal Mint around the globe to strike gold sovereigns close to where the gold is mined. And that begins in Australia in 1855 with the first branch mint, and you get 2 other branches being established in Australia in that century, in Melbourne and Perth. You get one opening in Canada, in Ottawa, as well at the start of the 20th century, and then you get a branch in India, in Bombay, which is a short-lived wartime expediency during the First World War, striking sovereigns only for 1 year. And after the close of the First World War, you get a branch opening in South Africa. All of these branches are established with the means to strike sovereigns and to produce the many, many millions required. And as a result of this global reach, the sovereign really does start to occupy an exalted position in the minds of the British and the international audience. And you start to get references to it in popular culture. So for example, when Robert Louis Stevenson is paid for writing Treasure Island, he mentions that he receives 100 jingling, tingling, golden minted quid. A rather nice phrase. And it elevates it to this position in the psyche of people as something more than just a coin. And we really get that from this particular image that we can see on screen, which at first looks completely abstract, and you must think, what on earth am I showing you? You can quite clearly see, however, at the centre of this you have a 1904 sovereign, and it's embedded in something. What that sovereign is embedded into is the end of Black Rod's staff. Now Black Rod is the gentleman usher of the House of Commons, and he is the chap that walks in front of the Queen at the state opening of Parliament and bangs on the door of Commons for admittance for the Queen. At the end of the staff, in which he's banging on the doors of the Commons, is this 1904 sovereign. And I think that speaks volumes about how the British public were viewing this coin at the start of the 20th century. It was symptomatic of the pride and the prestige of empire. And I should make the point, this was also a circulating coin at this point in history. You could actually get this in your change. It's extremely extravagant, however, to have the nation's gold reserve in your change, and really was a luxury. It becomes completely and utterly impractical during wartime. And one of the first casualties of the Great War is the circulating gold coinage. And you get David Lloyd George standing up in the House of Commons in August 1914 and stating that anybody who's hoarding gold or using gold is effectively helping the enemy more so than if they were taking up arms to fight against Britain. So instead of circulating gold coins going into people's change, you get them replaced with banknotes, £1 and 10 shilling banknotes to replace the sovereign and the half sovereign respectively. This is what finishes the heyday of the circulating gold coinage, because after the end of the First World War, Britain is effectively broke. It cannot afford to go back to producing circulating gold coins anymore. It does not mean that we stop producing sovereigns full stop. And you do see sovereigns produced at the start of new reigns. So you get a sovereign struck at the start of George VI's reign, and also a very, very limited number produced in 1953 to mark the start of Her Majesty's current reign. The sovereign does come back. It still survives. We have it in these proof forms struck to mark the starts of reign, and then in the 1950s and 1960s you start to see it coming back as a bullion coin. In fact, one of the last coins struck at Tower Hill before we moved down to Llantrisant in South Wales is a 1975 sovereign. Symbolic, really, I suppose, in coming full circle, given that it was at the start of when we moved to Tower Hill, we started producing sovereigns, and right at the end it is the last coin that was ever struck. We have marked important anniversaries of the sovereign as well. So 1989 saw that significant anniversary marking the first sovereign, Tudor sovereign, that was introduced during the reign of Henry VII. And what we can see on screen there is the sovereign issued to mark that particular occasion. A really beautiful design, and you can see how it's aping in some ways that original Tudor sovereign. And we see Her Majesty seated in very similar way to Henry VII all those centuries ago. And the sovereign continues to go from strength. It is still produced as a bullion coin today, and it is still produced as a proof coin for collectors today. And for many ways, the sovereign is the great survival story of the British coinage. Introduced in the reign of Henry VII, struck by all the Tudor monarchs, disappears at the start of the 17th century, but is brought back in the 19th century and continues despite war, despite all the economic shocks that have happened throughout the 20th century. It clings on. And the fact that today, in the 21st century, we are still making bullion sovereigns and we are still making proof sovereigns for collectors is a testament to the success of this particular coin.